All right, so you just witnessed the Eagles beat the Commanders 26-18. Close game, right? We're going to break it all down, the big moments, the surprises, and figure out what it means for both these teams going forward. So consider this like your shortcut to becoming an NFC East expert. Just sit back and listen. We've got a ton of post-game reports, analyses, even some of those hot takes everyone loves to argue about. Ready to dive in?
Oh, definitely. This Eagles-Commanders rivalry, it always brings the intensity, and with both teams looking for playoff spots, the stakes are even higher than usual this time.
Yeah, and Saquon Barkley, he
Yeah.
he really brought it. 198 total yards, that's rushing and receiving for anyone who needs a reminder, and 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter alone.
It's amazing to see how valuable a top running back can still be, even when, everyone's going crazy for these passing offenses. Barkley pretty much, he carried the Eagles, especially with Jalen Hurts having a quieter game than we're used to.
Yeah, some analysts are even saying that this puts Barkley in the MVP conversation. Kind of wild considering the Giants let him go, you know?
Yeah, it does make you wonder if they regret that decision. But we can't forget that the Commanders' offense has been struggling lately. This is their second straight game with a pretty underwhelming performance.
Yeah, they just couldn't seem to find a groove. A lot of people are pointing to Coach Dan Quinn's decision to go for it on fourth down in the fourth. Instead of kicking a field goal and potentially taking the lead, he went for it and they didn't convert.
Yeah, that call is definitely causing a stir. You have to remember, though, the Commanders have been really, really successful in fourth down conversions this season. They actually converted their first 11 attempts. But this time, it didn't work out.
Yeah, talk about high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
Really makes you think, what would you have done in that situation? Go for the safer play or go for the win?
It's a tough one. On the one hand, their track record said they could do it. But on the other, a field goal could have completely changed how the game was going.
And it's not like the Eagles were playing perfectly either. Jake Elliott, usually a pretty automatic kicker, he had a rough night, missed 2 field goals and an extra point. It's like everyone was a little off.
Except for Saquon Barkley, of course. And speaking of off, Jaden Daniels had his worst game as a pro tonight. Just couldn't connect with his receivers, and the Eagles' defense totally shut down his running game.
Yeah, he only ran for 13 yards total in this game, and the one before that combined. That's a huge drop-off from what we've seen from him this season.
It's like other teams are figuring out how to defend against that dual threat, being dangerous as a passer and a runner. If the Commanders want to keep winning, they got to figure out a way to counter that.
So you're saying that even though the Commanders have been better this season, they already have more wins than all of last year. This game shows they're not on the same level as the Eagles yet.
Yeah, they're not quite there yet, but they're definitely moving in the right direction. This game really, it showed how much of a difference a quarterback can make. Jaden Daniels, who had such a promising start to the season, just looked lost out there.
Yeah, it was almost like watching a different player, right? I mean, those runs he was making earlier this year, electrifying. Tonight, he was practically stuck in the pocket. Eagles' defense did a great job containing him.
They were relentless. They knew that taking away that running ability would force him to throw, and their pass rush was just on point all night.
Yeah, and on the Eagles side, even though Jalen Hurts didn't have his usual, flashy plays, he stayed calm, especially after that hit when he went down hard and they had to check for a concussion.
Yeah, that was a tense few minutes. Thankfully, it seems like he's all right. But those hits, they always remind you just how tough this sport is.
Absolutely. So, besides the quarterbacks, were there any other players that stood out to you?
Kenny Gainwell, the Eagles running back, he had a solid game. He didn't have the same numbers as Barkley, but he was crucial in keeping the chains moving, especially in that last quarter.
Yeah, his 3 consecutive runs for 34 yards, they really helped set up the Eagles' go-ahead touchdown. I think that was one of the turning points in the game.
Absolutely. And on the Commander side, I was impressed with the defensive line. They managed to disrupt the Eagles' passing game and put pressure on Hurts, which, is not easy.
Yeah, they were really effective at limiting A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Those guys were practically invisible.
They were. But, as we've said, they just couldn't stop Barkley. He was the difference maker for the Eagles.
Let's talk more about that fourth down call. Coach Quinn going for it instead of kicking the field goal. People are still talking about it.
It's a decision that'll be debated for weeks, I think. On the surface, it seems like a risky move. They were in field goal range. A good kick would have given them the lead.
Exactly. Why do you think he went for it?
Well, remember those 11 successful fourth down conversions they had before this? Coach Quinn seems to have a lot of faith in his offense to pull through in those clutch moments. But this time it didn't work out.
Do you think it was the right call?
It's hard to say. It's easy to look back and second guess when you know the result, but looking at their track record and Coach Quinn's style, it's not a crazy decision.
It definitely added to the drama. So, big picture, what are your takeaways from this game? What does it mean going forward for both teams?
For the Eagles, this win cements them as the team to beat in the NFC East. They're playing with confidence, the offense is balanced, and their defense is looking really strong.
Yeah, and they have a pretty easy schedule for the rest of the season, don't they? I read somewhere their remaining opponents have a combined record below .500, and they only have one more away game.
Right, it's going to be tough for anyone to catch them now, but let's not count out the Commanders just yet. They're still in a good spot to get a wild card spot, and they've shown they can be dangerous.
But they definitely need to get their offense going again. They can't just rely on their defense and special teams to win.
Exactly. They need to rediscover that consistency they had on offense earlier in the season.
And speaking of inconsistency, we got to talk about Jake Elliott. Missing 2 field goals and an extra point, that's just not like him.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if any player, even the most reliable, can have a bad day.
Yeah.
It also shows how important having a good backup kicker is. Every point counts in this league.
You're absolutely right.
So you mentioned earlier how the Commanders' defense did a good job of shutting down Jaden Daniels' running ability. Can we talk about that more?
Sure, a quarterback who can both run and pass well, a dual threat we call them, is dangerous. Adds another layer for defenses to deal with. The Eagles did a really good job of taking that running threat away early.
So by stopping his running, they forced him to stay in the pocket and throw, which is where the Eagles' defense had the advantage.
Exactly. It's a classic strategy against mobile quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Make them one-dimensional and then exploit the weaknesses. It sounds like the Commanders need to adjust their game plan.
They need to figure out how to counter that, for sure. Whether it's adjusting their plays to protect Daniels better, finding ways to get him out of the pocket more, or maybe even having a running back who can catch passes, they need to find a solution. Otherwise, teams are just going to copy what the Eagles did.
You know, it's interesting how this game had 2 very different quarterback styles. Jalen Hurts, the runner, and Jaden Daniels, the more of a pocket passer. Do you think one style is better than the other?
It's not about better or worse. It's about finding the right fit for your team and your offense. Both styles have pros and cons.
So, like, Hurts' running ability is a huge asset, but it also puts him at risk of getting injured more.
Exactly. And Daniels, while not as mobile, can be really accurate when he has time to throw. In the end, it's up to each team to figure out how to use their quarterback's strengths and minimize their weaknesses.
And speaking of maximizing strengths, I was reading about the Eagles' backup quarterback, Kenny Pickett. He has a pretty interesting story, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, he was actually a first-round pick for the Steelers a couple years ago. He even started for them for a while, but ended up losing the starting spot. Now he's with the Eagles, backing up Hurts. Just shows how unpredictable a quarterback's career can be in the NFL.
Yeah, it's a whole other level of competition, even within the team. Now, we talked about Jalen Hurts getting hit hard and having to be checked for a concussion. What exactly happens when that occurs?
The NFL takes concussions seriously, as they should. Anytime a player gets hit in the head like that, they're immediately checked out by a neurotrauma specialist. This is a doctor who isn't affiliated with either team, so it's an unbiased opinion.
So it's not just the team doctor making that call.
No, it's a much more thorough process now than it was in the past. The specialist will check for any signs of a concussion, confusion, dizziness, memory problems, that sort of thing. And if there's any doubt, the player sits out the rest of the game. It's all about putting the player's health first, which is how it should be.
That's good that the league is taking those precautions. So back to the Commanders for a second. We mentioned their offense has been struggling. What do you think is causing it?
There are a couple things. First, their opponents in these past couple games, the Steelers and the Eagles, they both have really tough defenses.
Yeah.
It's not easy to move the ball against those teams.
So they've just faced tougher competition.
That's part of it. But there are also some worries that their offensive scheme, their game plan, is becoming predictable. Their offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, he has a history of having offenses that start strong but then fade later in the season.
So maybe defenses are starting to figure them out.
Right. It's up to Kingsbury and the Commanders to adjust, come up with new things, and keep the defenses guessing. If they can't get that offensive spark back, it's going to be tough to make a deep playoff run.
We've talked a lot about the tactics and plays, but I'm curious about the mental side of things. In a close game like this, where it could go either way, how important is mental toughness?
It's huge. Mental toughness, resilience, The ability to stay focused when things are tough, that's often what separates the winners from the losers. You could see it with the Eagles tonight. They had challenges, the Commanders' early lead, Hurts' injury, the missed picks, but they never panicked. They just kept going, kept trusting their plan.
And what about the Commanders?
They seemed to get frustrated, especially on offense. You could see it in their body language. The communication wasn't there. It seemed like they were losing confidence.
So you're saying the Eagles were just mentally tougher?
In a close game, when the talent is pretty even, the mental game is often what decides it. And tonight, the Eagles definitely had that edge.
Interesting. Oh, before we move on, I found a cool stat while I was prepping for this. Did you know that this was Saquon Barkley's 4th straight game with at least 100 scrimmage yards against the Commanders?
Wow, that's impressive. Guess he always steps up against his old division rivals. Maybe he has a little extra motivation. Who knows?
Like he's got something to prove.
Maybe he does. But whatever the reason, he's a force, that's for sure. And those little personal storylines, those rivalries, that's what makes football so fun to watch, right?
For sure. I think we've covered a lot here in part 2. We analyzed the big moments, talked about the close calls, even got into the psychology of the game. But there's still more to discuss.
Yeah, always more to learn. We've got another part to this deep dive where we'll uncover even more about this game and what it means for the NFC East.
So we've spent a good amount of time breaking down this Eagles-Commanders game. But let's zoom out a little. What does this game tell us about the NFC East as a whole?
Well, I think it kind of confirms what many were thinking. The Eagles are the team to beat in this division right now. They're playing with a lot of confidence, their offense is well-rounded, and their defense, it's looking tough.
Yeah, and they've got a pretty easy schedule coming up, right? I think I read that their remaining opponents altogether have a losing record. Plus, they only have one more away game.
That's right. It's going to be hard for any team to catch them at this point. But, let's not count out the Commanders completely. They're still in a good position for a wild card spot, and they've shown they could be a real threat.
They definitely need to get their offense going again, though. Can't just rely on defense and special teams to win games.
Yeah, for sure. They need to find that offensive consistency they had earlier this season. And speaking of inconsistency, we got to mention Jake Elliott again. Missing 2 field goals and an extra point. That's just not typical for him.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, Even the best players can have an off day. Shows you how important it is to have a good backup kicker. Every point matters.
You got that right.
Yeah.
Now, going back to quarterbacks for a sec, we had Jalen Hurts, the runner, against Jaden Daniels, the more traditional pocket passer. Got me thinking which style is better for winning in the long run.
That's a great question. Hurts' ability to run adds a whole other element to the Eagles' offense, but it also makes him more likely to get hit, possibly injured.
Yeah, it's a trade-off. Teams with mobile quarterbacks got to find that balance, protect them while still using their skills.
And Daniels, while he's not as mobile, can be very accurate when he has time.
Exactly. Each style has its pluses and minuses. It all comes down to finding the right fit for your team and your offense. And of course, coaching plays a big part in making the most of your quarterback's strengths.
We've talked about a lot of specifics from this game, but what do you think is the biggest takeaway?
For me, it goes back to that 4th down call. Coach Quinn deciding to go for it instead of the field goal. It's a perfect example of the kind of decisions coaches have to make in the moment. There's no easy answer, and every choice can have big consequences.
It's easy for us to second guess, right? We're sitting here comfortably, but those coaches, they got to make those calls in a split second with so much on the line.
Exactly. And whether it works out or not, it's all part of what makes football so exciting. It's unpredictable.
Yeah, I agree. After this deep dive, I feel like I have a much better understanding of this game and what it all means for both teams moving forward. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I think this game shows that the NFC East is anyone's game this year. The Eagles might be the favorites now, but the Commanders, even the Giants and Cowboys, they can't be ruled out. It's going to be a fun race to the finish.
Can't wait to see how it all unfolds. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. We'll be back soon to break down another game. Until then, keep learning, keep analyzing, and keep your eyes on the ball.